The wooden floorboards creaked beneath Clara Dorn's uneven steps as she approached the altar of Red Hollow's only church. Her left leg dragged slightly behind her right, a permanent reminder of the wagon accident that had claimed her parents' lives 3 winters ago. She clutched a small bouquet of wild flowers, her knuckles white against the faded blue fabric of her patched dress, the finest she owned, mended meticulously for this day. The morning sun filtered through the dusty windows, casting golden beams across the worn pews. "She's here," someone whispered too loudly to be discreet. "The mail-order bride," another voice answered with a poorly concealed snicker. Edward Langley awaited at the altar, his polite smile freezing then falling away entirely as his gaze traveled from her face to her halting gait. His eyes widened with horror, then narrowed with anger. The flowers in his lapel suddenly seemed to wilt under the heat of his displeasure. "What is this deception?" he hissed, loud enough for the front row to hear. "You never mentioned you were crippled." The last word fell from his lips like poison. Josephine stopped, the small church suddenly spinning around her. "I wrote about the accident. You wrote of a slight injury." Thomas stepped backward, away from her, as if her condition might be contagious. "This is unacceptable," someone snickered in the back. Then another. Soon laughter rippled through the small gathering, mostly Thomas's business associates and their curious wives. Josephine felt heat rising in her cheeks as 20 pairs of eyes fixed on her damaged leg. "The ceremony is cancelled," Thomas announced, straightening his waistcoat with practiced dignity. "I cannot be expected to marry damaged goods," he spoke, as if discussing a shipment of bruised fruit, rather than a woman standing before him. The church emptied quickly, ladies whispering behind gloved hands, men clapping Thomas on the shoulder in masculine solidarity. No one met Josephine's eyes as they filed past. Soon only she remained, seated on the front pew where the pastor had guided her with pitying hands. "I'll return shortly, my child," he'd promised. But hours passed, and the afternoon light slanted long through the windows. She remained there, unable to face the town that had just witnessed her humiliation, with nowhere to go and no money to leave. Her aunt's letter had been clear. There was no room for her return to Iron Vale. The stage fare she'd spent to reach Red Hollow had emptied her meager savings. When the church door finally creaked open, Josephine didn't turn. Probably the pastor, coming to tell her she needed to leave before evening service. Instead, heavy bootsteps echoed through the empty church. Deliberate and slow, she felt a presence stop beside her pew, a shadow falling across her lap. Still waiting on that wedding. The voice was deep, graveled like stones rolling down a dry riverbed. Josephine looked up, and her breath caught. A tall man stood before her, his face a landscape of ruin. A jagged scar ran from his right temple, down across his eye to the corner of his mouth, pulling the flesh tight. The skin around it was mottled red and pink, the unmistakable mark of severe burns long healed. His right eye was milky, unseeing, while his left, dark as coffee, studied her intently. She recognized him from whispered stories. Gideon Cross, the gunslinger who'd disappeared from these parts years ago. The man they said had killed a dozen men. The man they said should be dead. "No," she answered finally, finding her voice. "There won't be a wedding." Silas's one good eye studied her for a long moment. Without another word, he extended a gloved hand toward her. The leather was worn but well cared for, like everything about him. His clothes simple but clean, his posture straight. Despite the obvious pain his scars must cause, confusion clouded her thoughts. "Sir." The church doors banged open again as Edward Langley and several townsmen strode in. They froze at the sight of Silas. "Blackwood," Thomas sputtered, color draining from his face. "You dare show your face here?" Silas didn't turn, his hand still extended to Josephine. "She doesn't belong here," he said, his voice carrying through the church like a low thunder. "Take her then," Thomas laughed, regaining his composure with visible effort. "The cripple and the monster, a perfect match." The men behind him chuckled, finding courage in numbers. Silas finally turned, his posture shifting subtly. Something in his stance made the men step back, hands drifting toward hidden weapons. "She wasn't made for you," he said softly, dangerously. "None of you deserve her." Heart-pounding, Josephine placed her hand in his fingers closed around hers with surprising gentleness. As they walked down the aisle together past the stunned faces of the townspeople, Josephine felt the weight of stares. But for the first time since the accident, not all the eyes were on her limp. Outside the church, the afternoon sun hung low over Red Hollow's dusty main street. Josephine blinked in the harsh light, suddenly uncertain of the choice she'd made. Following a scarred gunslinger seemed scarcely better than being abandoned at the altar. "Why?" she asked, pulling her hand from his grasp. "Why would you help me?" Gideon Cross surveyed the town, his good eye narrowing at the faces watching from storefronts and saloon windows. Women pulled children indoors. Men stepped onto porches, hands resting casually near holstered weapons. "I've got my reasons," he said finally, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "That's not an answer." A hint of something, amusement perhaps, flickered across his scarred features. "You want answers, Miss Miller, or you want to get out of this town before nightfall." Her last name on his lips startled her. She hadn't introduced herself. Before she could ask how he knew her, a voice called out from behind them. "Blackwood, you've got some nerve returning here." Sheriff Maddox approached, hand hovering near his holster. The lawman was in his 50s, his mustache more gray than brown, but his stance suggested he was no stranger to confrontation. Two deputies flanked him, younger men with something to prove. "Just passing through," Silas replied evenly, "with Thomas Bennett's bride." The sheriff's gaze shifted to Josephine. "Miss, are you going with this man willingly?" An unexpected question. Was she? Josephine glanced between the sheriff and the church where Thomas now stood on the steps, watching with poorly disguised relief. She straightened her spine. "Yes," she said firmly. "Mr. Bennett rejected our arrangement. I'm free to leave with whomever I choose." The sheriff frowned. "You know who this man is, what he's done?" "I know the stories," she replied, though in truth she knew only fragments. Whispers of a ranch burned down, accusations of murder, a man with a ruined face who'd vanished 5 years ago. Not stories, facts. Sheriff Maddox stepped closer, lowering his voice. "This man killed 3 people and burned the Thorn Ranch to ash. We never could prove it, but everyone knows." Silas remained perfectly still, his face impassive. Something about his calm made Josephine doubt the sheriff's certainty. "She's made her choice," Silas said finally. "We'll be gone within the hour." The sheriff's hand tightened on his gun belt. "Thorn's son is the deputy now. He sees you, there'll be blood. Then we'd best not linger." They walked in tense silence to the livery stable at the edge of town. Josephine struggled to keep pace with Silas's long strides. Her leg ached from standing so long in the church, but she refused to complain. The stable boy's eyes widened at the sight of Silas. Without a word, the boy scurried to the back, returning moments later with an older man, the livery owner. "Blackwood." The man nodded cautiously. "Your horse is still here. Couldn't sell him. Ornery beast, won't let anyone else ride him." "Knew he wouldn't," Silas replied, the closest thing to warmth she'd heard in his voice. While Silas paid for his horse's keeping, Josephine wondered about her meager possessions at the hotel. Everything she owned was in a single trunk: clothes, her father's medical books, her mother's silver hand mirror. But retrieving it meant facing Thomas again. As if reading her thoughts, Silas turned to her. "Where are your things?" "Bennett's hotel, room 12. He considered this, then handed the stable owner more coins. "Need a pack horse too, and saddle your gentlest mare for the lady." The livery owner looked at Josephine's leg, then back to Silas with a question in his eyes. "She'll manage," Silas said firmly. An hour later they rode out of Red Hollow, Josephine on a dappled gray mare, Silas on a massive black stallion that seemed as forbidding as its master. Behind them, a pack horse carried Josephine's trunk, retrieved by the livery owner's son for an extra $1. "Where are we going?" Josephine asked as the town disappeared behind them, the buildings growing smaller against the vast landscape of rolling hills and distant mountains. "Somewhere safe," was all he said, guiding them toward the dense pine forest that bordered the eastern valley. As they rode, Josephine caught him glancing at her occasionally, assessing her riding. She sat straight in the saddle, determined not to show weakness despite the growing pain in her hip. Whatever his reasons for helping her, she wouldn't be a bird. Only when they entered the shadow of the pines did she realize, for better or worse, she had trusted her fate to a man whose very name made people tremble. The forest closed around them like a sanctuary, pine branches filtering the late afternoon sunlight into dappled patterns across the narrow trail. The air smelled of resin and earth, so different from the dust and horse manure of Red Hollow. Josephine breathed deeply, letting the scent wash away the memory of laughter echoing through the church. "How much farther?" she asked, breaking an hour's silence. Her hip throbbed with each step of the air, but she'd endured worse pain. "Another hour," Silas replied without turning. His black stallion picked its way confidently through the undergrowth, clearly familiar with the path. As they rode deeper into the forest, Josephine studied her unlikely savior. In the shifting forest light, his scarred profile seemed less monstrous, merely marked. His movements in the past, he carried himself with the quiet dignity of a man who asked nothing from the world. The sun was setting when they finally emerged into a small clearing. A cabin stood in its center, rustic but solid, with a covered porch and chimney of stacked river stones. A stream gurgled nearby and a small corral adjoined a lean-to stable. It was not what she had expected from a notorious gunslinger. "Your home?" she asked, surprised by the domesticity of the scene. Silas nodded. Dismounting with easy grace, he approached her horse, looking up at her with his good eye. "Need help?" pried Ward with practicality. After hours in the saddle, her damaged leg had stiffened to near uselessness. "Yes," she admitted. His hands were strong and careful as they spanned her waist, lifting her down as if she weighed nothing. For a moment, they stood close enough that she could see the intricate patterns of his scarring. The way his right eyelid drooped slightly, the flecks of amber in his left eye. He stepped back abruptly. "I'll tend the horses. Make yourself comfortable." Inside, the cabin surprised her again. It was spare but clean, with a stone fireplace, a sturdy table with 2 chairs, a cast-iron cook stove and shelves stocked with provisions. A curtain partitioned off what she assumed was a sleeping area. Books, actual books, lined a rough-hewn shelf, not the trappings of a murderer or a drifter, but of a man who had built a life here. Josephine sank onto a chair, massaging her aching leg. When Silas returned, he carried her trunk, setting it beside the door before busying himself with lighting a fire. "Why did you help me?" she asked again, determined to get an answer. The kindling caught flames, casting his scarred face in dramatic shadow.
"Bennett is a snake," he said simply. "Saw what he did to you. Wasn't right. There's more to it than that." Silas straightened, looking at her directly. "Yes. Will you tell me when you need to know?" He moved to the stove, striking another match. "Hungry." The sudden change of subject frustrated her, but the mention of food reminded Josephine she hadn't eaten since morning. "Yes." As Silas prepared a simple meal of beans, salt pork, and cornbread, Josephine observed him. His movements were precise, practiced. This was clearly a routine for him. He handled the knife with the same confidence he'd shown with the reins, with no wasted motion. "You live here alone?" she asked. "Yes." "For how long?" 3 years? He stirred the beans. "Since I came back, the sheriff said you killed people." His hand paused over the pot and resumed stirring. "He would." "Did you?" Silas turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "Miss Miller, we've got an arrangement to figure out. You need a place to stay, until you decide where to go next. I can provide that. What I can't provide is answers to questions that don't concern your immediate future. If I'm staying under your roof, your past very much concerns me," she countered. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Fair enough, but not tonight." He placed a steaming plate before her. "Tonight you eat and rest. Tomorrow's soon enough for difficult conversations." They ate in silence. The food was plain but satisfying, and Josephine realized how famished she truly was. After clearing their plates, Silas disappeared behind the curtain, returning with a pillow and blankets. "You'll take the bed," he said, arranging the blankets on a bearskin rug near the fire. "I'll sleep here." Josephine hesitated. "I can't take your bed." "You can and will." His tone brooked no argument. "Your leg needs proper rest." Too exhausted to protest further, Josephine retreated behind the curtain. The bed was a simple frame with a straw-filled mattress, but after her ordeal it felt luxurious. As she changed into her nightgown, she heard Silas moving quietly around the cabin, banking the fire, checking doors and windows. "Mr. Blackwood," she called softly. The movements paused. "Yes, thank you." The words felt insufficient but necessary. A long silence followed. "Sleep well, Miss Miller," he finally replied, his voice softer than she'd heard it before. As Josephine drifted towards sleep, she realized something strange. For the first time since the accident that took her parents and mangled her leg, she felt safe. Dawn filtered through the cabin's single window, rousing Josephine from the deepest sleep she'd known in months. For a moment, disorientation gripped her. This wasn't the hotel room in Red Hollow. Then yesterday's events crashed back. The humiliation at the church, the scarred gunslinger, the forest cabin. She dressed quickly, in her simplest dress, smoothing the wrinkles as best she could. Behind the curtain she heard movement. Silas was already awake. "Coffee's hot," he called, as if sensing her consciousness. Josephine pushed aside the curtain to find him stoking the cook stove. A pot of something fragrant bubbled on the surface.
The blankets where he'd slept were already folded neatly by the fireplace. "How long have you been up?" she asked, accepting the steaming mug he offered. "Since first light. Always do." He stirred whatever was cooking. "Oatmeal. Not fancy, but it'll keep you going." They ate in companionable silence. Josephine's mind churned with questions, but she sensed pushing too hard would only make Silas withdraw. Instead, she observed. His movements were economical, his scarred face focused on each task. Despite his fearsome appearance, there was something almost peaceful about him in these quiet moments. After breakfast, he surprised her. "Need to check my traps. You'll be all right here for a few hours?" Of course, she hesitated. "May I look at your books?" Something like pleasure flickered in his good eye. "Help yourself." After he left, Josephine explored the cabin more thoroughly. The bookshelf revealed unexpected treasures, volumes on local flora, several well-worn novels, a medical text similar to one her father had owned. Most surprising was a collection of poetry, Wordsworth and Keats, the pages dog-eared and marked. The cabin itself told a story of careful self-sufficiency. Dried herbs hung from the rafters, preserved fruits and vegetables lined shelves in the small root cellar, accessible through a trapdoor. Everything had its place, nothing wasted or frivolous. By midday, restlessness drove her outside. The clearing around the cabin was well maintained, with a small vegetable garden to one side. She spotted a patch of wild strawberries and knelt awkwardly to pick them, ignoring the protests from her leg. "Your father was Dr. Miller from Iron Vale," Josephine started, nearly toppling. Silas stood at the forest's edge, a brace of rabbits over his shoulder. She hadn't heard him approach. "Yes," she confirmed, surprised. "How did you know?" "He treated my burns." Silas approached, setting down his catch. "After the fire, before I left these parts." The pieces connected suddenly. "You were his mystery patient, the one he wouldn't discuss." Silas nodded once. "Doctor-patient? Confidence." He honored it. "He said you'd been gravely injured saving someone from a fire." A shadow crossed Silas's face. "That what he told you?" "He never mentioned your name, only said his patient had shown extraordinary courage." Josephine straightened, wincing at the stiffness in her leg. "Was it true?" Instead of answering, Silas gestured to her leg. "The accident. Wagon rollover on Cripple Creek Pass." She stiffened. "Yes, 3 years ago. I heard about it. Your father was respected. Even here, he was a good man." Josephine fought the familiar wave of grief. "They both were. My parents." Silas nodded solemnly. "I know what it's like, losing family." There was such quiet certainty in his voice that Josephine knew it wasn't mere sympathy. "The Thorn Ranch fire," she ventured. "You were accused of starting it." His face closed like a shutter. "I'll clean these rabbits. Stew for dinner." He turned away, conversation clearly over. Throughout the afternoon they worked separately, but in awareness of each other. Josephine gathering herbs from the garden, Silas preparing the rabbits and chopping wood. They moved around each other like cautious dancers, maintaining distance but acknowledging presence. As evening approached, Josephine was kneading dough for biscuits when rapid hoofbeats approached the clearing. Silas appeared instantly at her, side rifle in hand. Inside, he ordered, his voice low. Through the window, Josephine watched a young man ride into the clearing. He couldn't have been more than 20, but he wore a deputy's badge on his chest. "That's Thorne's boy, Silas," muttered James, "the son of the man who died in the fire." "Yes." Silas's jaw tightened. "Stay here." He stepped onto the porch, rifle lowered but visible. "Deputy Thorne." The young man's face contorted with hatred. "Blackwood. Sheriff said you were back. Been back 3 years, you know that. Never came to town before." James Thorne's hand hovered near his holster. "Now you show up and steal Bennett's bride?" "Didn't steal anyone. She made her choice." The deputy's eyes flickered to the window, where Josephine stood. "Sheriff says I can't touch you without proof. Says the past is past." His voice shook. "But I know what you did to my my little sisters. One day, I'll prove it." Silas remained motionless. "Anything else, deputy?" Thorne spat on the ground. "Just a warning. Bennett's mighty upset about his bride. Says she took something valuable of his. He's offering a reward for her return. She's not property. To Bennett she is." Thorne gathered his reins. "Watch your back, Blackwood. This time you won't disappear before justice finds you." As the young deputy rode away, Josephine saw something she hadn't expected in Silas's posture. Not fear or anger, but a profound, bone-deep weariness. Whatever had happened at the Thorn Ranch, it haunted more than just the deputy. It haunted the scarred man who had given her refuge too. Night fell like a curtain over the forest. Dinner passed quietly, the weight of Deputy Thorne's visit hanging between them. Josephine sensed Silas withdrawing further into himself. With each passing hour, his replies becoming more clipped, his gaze distant. You should leave tomorrow, he finally said as he stoked the fire for the evening. I can take you to the stage stop at Miller's Crossing, 15 miles east. Because of what the deputy said, Josephine set down the shirt she'd been mending. 1. Silas's, torn at the sleeve. Bennett's not a man to cross if he's offering a reward. Silas's hand tightened on the poker. It's not safe for you here. Is it safe anyway? I have no money, no connections beyond Red Hollow. She kept her voice steady. And I don't fear Edward Langley. You should. Silas straightened, firelight dancing across his scarred features. He's got more power in this territory than the law itself. What did I supposedly steal from him? A muscle twitched in Silas's jaw. Nothing that matters. Then why? It's not about theft, it's about pride. He turned to face her fully. No one refuses Edward Langley. No one leaves him. And no one associated with me gets to live peacefully. The bitterness in his voice revealed more than all his silences. Later, as Josephine lay in the bed behind the curtain, she heard Silas moving restlessly on his makeshift bed by the fire. Sleep eluded her as well, her mind churning with questions. What connected Silas to Ben? What really happened at the Thorn Ranch? A low moan from beyond the curtain jolted her fully awake. Then another, followed by mumbled words. Throwing back the covers, she limped to the partition and peered around it. Silas thrashed in his blankets, his face contorted. No, he muttered out, fire spreading. Emily, Sarah, run. His voice rose to a shout. Not the children. Without thinking, Josephine knelt beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. Silas, wake up. It's just a nightmare. He bolted upright, his hand closing like a vice around her wrist. For a terrifying moment, his eyes were wild, unseeing. Then recognition dawned and he released her instantly. Josephine. He rarely used her first name. It sounded different in his rough voice. Warm, almost reverent. You were having a nightmare. She rubbed her wrist, knowing there would be bruises tomorrow. Shame crossed his face. Did I hurt you? No. The lie came easily. You called out names, Emily and Sarah. Silas closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, they held such raw pain that Josephine's breath caught. Thorn's daughters, he said softly. 8 and 6 when they died. In the fire, he nodded once. I tried to get them out. His hand drifted unconsciously to his scarred face. Too late. The story untangled itself in her mind. You didn't set the fire. You tried to save them. Doesn't matter what I did or didn't do. They died. He looked away. Town needed someone to blame. But why you? Silas was silent so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally he sighed. I worked for Thorn, handled his horses, helped with the ranch. I saw things, business dealings that weren't right. Thorn was being pressured by someone powerful. The night of the fire I overheard an argument. Threats were made. By whom? His good eye met hers steadily. Never saw his face, but I recognized the voice later. Understanding dawned. Bennett. Can't prove it. Never could. Silas ran a hand through his hair. When the fire started, I was in the stables. By the time I reached the house, the lower floor was engulfed. I got Mrs. Thorne out, but she was badly burned. Died the next morning. I went back for the girls. His voice broke. The roof collapsed. Thorne was trapped in his study. I couldn't reach any of them. Josephine reached out instinctively, laying her hand on his. It wasn't your fault. Tell that to James Thorne. Silas' fingers curled around hers briefly before withdrawing. Town decided I started the fire to cover Thorne's murder. My word against Bennett's respected position. No contest. Is that when you left? He nodded. Your father treated my burns in secret. Gave me money to flee. Said he knew the truth would come out eventually. A bitter smile touched his lips. Still waiting on that. They sat in silence. The fire crackling softly. Finally Josephine asked the question that had been nagging at her since Red Hollow. Why did you come for me at the church? The real reason. Silas met her gaze directly. Bennett's been buying up land all through the territory. Your father owned the mineral rights to Serpent Ridge. Most valuable copper deposit in 3 states. Shock rippled through her. My father never mentioned any mineral rights. Probably didn't know their worth. But Bennett did. Silas' voice hardened. Your accident wasn't entirely accidental, Josephine. The brake line on your parents' wagon was cut. The world seemed to tilt beneath her. How could you possibly know that? Because I investigated after I returned. Your father saved my life. I owed him that much. Silas' face was grim. Bennett's been searching for those rights for years. When he learned Dr. Miller's daughter was still alive, he arranged our correspondence. Josephine whispered. The piece is falling into place. The marriage was never about me. Marriage would have given him legal claim to everything you own, including those rights. Silas hesitated. When he saw your leg, he realized he could publicly reject you, make you desperate enough to sign over any assets just to leave town. The calculated cruelty staggered her. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Thank you, she said finally, for telling me the truth. Silas nodded once, then surprised her by reaching out to brush a strand of hair from her face. His touch was gentle, almost tender. Try to sleep, he said softly. Tomorrow we'll figure out what to do. As Josephine returned to bed, her mind whirled with revelations. Her parents' death, her humiliation at the altar, all orchestrated by the same man. And Silas, carrying the weight of his own unjust accusation, had recognized the pattern and intervened. They were both survivors bearing scars, hers hidden beneath her skirts, his exposed for all to judge. But tonight, in sharing their wounds, something had shifted between them. Trust perhaps, or something deeper that neither was ready to name. A violent storm descended, trapping Josephine and Silas in the cabin for 3 days. In that forced proximity they began to truly know each other. While the rain pounded the roof and thunder shook the timbers, Josephine discovered her father's medical text among Silas's few possessions. She examined the old injury in his shoulder, a torn muscle that had never healed properly, and prepared a salve from his stores of herbs. You have your father's touch, Silas commented as her fingers worked the knots in his shoulder, gentle but firm. In return for her care, he allowed her to begin teaching him to read properly. Though he knew the basics, years without practice had left gaps in his knowledge. Josephine was surprised by how quickly he learned, his single good eye intent on the page, his brow furrowed in concentration. On the third night, as they sat before the fire with the storm still raging outside, Silas asked, "Why aren't you afraid of me? Most people can't even look at this." He gestured to his scarred face. "I've seen worse in my father's surgery," she replied simply. "A person's appearance tells you nothing about their character, and yet you were judged for your limp by small minds." She smiled wryly. "Just as you were judged for your scars." When Josephine lost her balance rising from her chair, Silas caught her with surprising speed, his hands steady at her waist. For a moment, they stood close, something unspoken passing between them before he stepped back, his expression carefully neutral. "Good night, Josephine," he said softly. The storm had changed them both. They were no longer strangers thrown together by circumstance, but two people finding unexpected comfort in each other's presence. A week after the storm, while Josephine gathered herbs at the forest's edge, Silas appeared suddenly, rifle in hand. "Get back to the cabin," he said quietly. Now, inside he moved with purpose, checking weapons, peering through windows, saw signs of riders. 5, maybe 6, he explained tersely. "Bennett's men most likely." They waited in tense silence until a shot cracked through the air. The window beside Silas shattered, and he dropped to the floor, blood staining his shirt where the bullet had grazed his arm. "It's not deep," Josephine assured him, bandaging the wound quickly. "The bleeding's already slowing." "Blackwood," a voice called from outside. "Send out the woman and we'll let you live." The standoff continued into nightfall. "They'll rush us before dawn," Silas predicted. "The root cellar," Josephine whispered. "Does it connect to anything?" Surprise flickered in his eyes. "There's an old tunnel, mining days, leads to a shaft about half a mile away." "How did you know?" "I noticed the airflow when we stored the preserves." "You should go," he urged. "I'll hold them off." "Not without you," Josephine insisted. Using controlled fire as a distraction, they escaped through the tunnel as smoke filled the cabin. They reached another, smaller cabin further up the mountainside, but their safety was short-lived. As Josephine warmed herself by the fire Silas had built, she heard a gunshot outside. Peering out the door, she saw Silas crumpled on the ground, Edward Langley standing over him, flanked by Deputy Thorne. "Found him at last," Bennett said, nudging Silas with his boot. "The man who ruined everything." "Is he dead?" Thorne asked, voice eager. "Just winged him. Want him awake for what comes next." Bennett looked toward the cabin. "Come out, Miss Miller, or we'll drag you out." Josephine stepped outside, keeping the revolver hidden in the folds of her skirt. "What do you want from me?" Bennett smiled coldly. "Just your signature, my dear, on a transfer of mineral rights. Then this can all be over, and Silas, the murderer, gets what he deserves." Finally, Bennett gestured to Thorne. "The deputy here has been waiting a long time for justice." Silas groaned, stirring slightly. Blood darkened his shirt. "A shoulder wound, not immediately fatal but serious enough." Bennett pulled papers from his coat. Sign these, and you can walk away. Start fresh somewhere far from here. Josephine stepped closer, seemingly compliant. As Bennett extended the papers, she raised the revolver, aiming it steadily at his chest. I think not, Mr. Bennett. His eyes widened with surprise, then narrowed. You wouldn't dare. I've nothing left to lose, she replied calmly. And unlike you, I've seen enough death to know exactly where to aim. A tense silence followed, broken only by Silas's labored breathing. Then, unexpectedly, he began to laugh, a pained, rasping sound that drew everyone's attention. What's so amusing, Blackwood? Bennett demanded. Silas struggled to a sitting position, blood staining his shirt. That you think you've won? He nodded toward the forest. When you're surrounded. For a moment, Bennett looked uncertain. Then a voice called from the darkness. Drop your weapons. 3 figures emerged from the tree. 2 men Josephine didn't recognize, and the livery owner from Red Hollow. Santiago brothers, Silas explained through pain. Old friends, been watching Bennett for years. The tables turned swiftly. As Bennett and Thorne were disarmed, Josephine rushed to Silas's side, examining his wound with shaking hands. It's deep, she murmured. You've lost blood. Had worse, he replied, his good eye focused on her face. You saved my life. Inside the cabin, Miguel Santiago explained how they'd been building a case against Bennett for years. His brother, Javier, dropped a leather satchel on the table, found this in Bennett's saddlebag. The satchel contained Bennett's journal with detailed accounts of his crimes, including the murder of the Thorne family and the sabotage of the wagon. He kept records, Josephine asked incredulously, leafing through the pages. Men like Bennett, Silas said from his place by the fire. They're proud of their schemes, think they're untouchable. That night, Silas caught Josephine's hand as she changed his bandage. I need to tell you something. I knew who you were when I found you at the church. What do you mean? I've been watching Bennett's movements for years. When I heard he was bringing in a bride, Silas's voice roughened. I planned to use you to draw Bennett out. Understanding dawned, bringing pain. So everything was a lie. Not everything. Not for long. Silas's scarred hand reached for hers. I didn't expect you, Josephine. Didn't expect to care. She pulled away, hurt. I need time to think. The next morning, Josephine approached Silas as he split wood despite his injury. I'm going to testify against Bennett, she said quietly. He nodded, resignation evident, and then she continued, meeting his gaze steadily. I'd like to come back if that offer still stands. Surprise flickered across his scarred face. Why? Because everyone deserves a second chance, she said simply. Even a scarred gunslinger who made the wrong choice for the right reasons. Junction City bustled with activity when Josephine arrived with the Santiago brothers and their prisoner. Marshal Frank Holden examined Bennett's journal with increasing interest. This is quite a collection of crimes, he remarked. You're willing to testify to all this, Miss Miller? I am, Josephine confirmed. Bennett sneered. The word of a cripple, and a collection of Mexicans against a respected businessman. The territorial governor himself is a personal friend, was, Marshal Holden corrected. Governor Thompson resigned last month amid corruption allegations. You're going to hang Bennett. To Josephine's surprise, James Thorne also testified, having read Bennett's journal. I spent 5 years hating the wrong man, he told her, his young face haunted. I've withdrawn the charges against Blackwood, he added. He's a free man now, officially. By selling 1/10 of her restored mineral rights, Josephine secured enough money for a comfortable future. Before leaving Junction City, she received a silver locket from Elizabeth Thornton, who had been with Martha Thorne in her final hours. She wanted him to have it, Elizabeth explained, to remember the family he tried to save, not the one people accused him of destroying. When Josephine returned to the forest clearing, Silas stood chopping wood, his axe pausing mid-swing at the sound of her wagon. You came back, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I said I would. Then, awaiting trial, and you've been officially exonerated. Silas's fingers trembled as he opened the locket. All these years, I thought everyone believed I killed them. Not everyone, Josephine said gently, and now the whole territory will know the truth. Spring transformed the forest and the rebuilt cabin. A small addition served as Josephine's surgery, where she treated trappers, miners and settlers who sought her medical skills. You should charge them something, Silas remarked one evening. Josephine smiled. They pay in their own way. Information, supplies, goodwill. One morning a letter from town brought news of Bennett's conviction. You going to the hanging? Silas asked. No, Josephine said firmly. I don't need to watch him die. Later at Miller's Crossing, they collected a package addressed to Josephine. Surgical instruments from Dr. Elizabeth Blackwell, The first woman doctor in America. Your reputation's spreading, Silas said as they rode home. After a comfortable silence, he spoke again. I've been thinking, we should make it official. Make what official? Us. There's a circuit preacher coming through next Sunday. Her heart swelled. Are you asking me to marry you, Gideon Cross? I know I'm not what most women dream of, but I love you, Josephine. Yes, she said simply. They were married in the same church where they had first met. Josephine wore her blue dress, now beautifully mended. Silas stood tall, his scars visible tall. We are gathered to witness the union of two souls, who have found in each other what the world denied them. The preacher began. At their cabin, Silas carried her across the threshold despite her protests. About his shoulder. It's strong enough now, he insisted, thanks to your care. As evening settled, they stood together on the porch, watching the first stars appear. Did you ever imagine this? Josephine asked softly. That day in the church when you found me? He shook his head. Never dared hope for so much. What an unlikely pair we are. The lame bride and the scarred gunslinger. Not how others see us anymore, he reminded her. To them you're the healer. I'm just the lucky man who claimed you. We claimed each other, she corrected gently, and in doing so, claimed our place in the world. Two outcasts, who had found belonging in each other's arms. Two wounded souls who had discovered that scars, whether visible or hidden, need not define a life. Two hearts that had recognized in each other the perfect complement, stronger together than either could be alone. In a society that often judges by appearances, Josephine and Silas found healing in the most unlikely place, with someone whose society had also cast aside. Their journey reminds us that our greatest strength often comes from embracing our vulnerabilities, and that true healing begins when we find those who see beyond our scars. Have you ever found acceptance in unexpected places? Or perhaps you've been the one to look beyond someone's exterior to see their true worth? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this one.